Mizuki, our first playable therapist in Genshin, is here. Hoyoverse might need their own therapist when we see how low the banner sales are going to be for this half. Let's look at her teams though, because I actually found them to be a lot of fun. She's similar to Sayu in that she's going to circle the enemies on-field while units of other elements do off-field shenanigans not triggered by normal attacks. Some people refer to them as AFK teams. Given the nature of the gameplay, you will find people recommend playing her with more or less the same units. No matter whose video you watch, you'll end up seeing a lot of Farina, Auroron, Mawika and such. I try to have each team follow a different archetype, 1 or 2 main reactions per team, and that way I could explore the character roster with some unexpected surprises for you. I can't add units in that don't exist though, so apologies if you see a lot of the same names popping up. It's not my choice that every other character that's come out for the past 2 years is an on-field unit. Electrocharge got a buff in 5.2 as well as a new unit in Auroron. He can hold 4-piece scroll too, which is going to buff Electro and Hydro. Farina providing the off-field Hydro means you have a few options in the last slot. If you can get enough energy recharge on her, Lisa's going to be an option. Her burst reduces the opponent's defense, which doesn't increase swirl damage, but it will make Farina and Auroron deal more. Yaimiko's an option too, or you could go with Fischl, but you won't be able to make use of a C6. If you went for Siegeween, she's going to be great for buffing your Farina too. If not, you could use Kokomi as an alternative for the Hydro Resonance. Now when it comes to elemental application, these units on paper look like they'd have anti-synergy in that you don't know who's vaping. Will Mawika vape or melt? Does Mizuki remove the aura from the enemies? Despite these concerns on paper, it works in practice and was one of the strongest in my testing. Sometimes random bullshit go works, and if that's your style, then you've got yourself another driver. Not bad for a unit you can pick up for free later in the year. As you know by now, all the teams in this video have Mizuki at C0. Imagine this at C2 when she gives approximately a 40% elemental damage buff to everyone. In terms of all that doom posting you've been seeing about Mizuki and worst 5-star in the game, sure, there are better alternatives to her, but if you like a character, don't be afraid to get excited. Even though Mizuki's an Anemo unit, you could play with Nahida. The two elements don't directly react with each other, but throwing in Electro and or Hydro gives you some options. You'd go with Farina as the Hydro option again because Mizuki can't trigger Yelan or Xingqiu's attacks. Auroron for Electro gives you Aggravate for Nahida and Auroron's damage, as well as enough Electro to trigger Hyper Bloom when there are Bloom Seeds. You won't generate as many Bloom Seeds as you do in regular Hyper Bloom teams though, so I wouldn't call this team meta. It's more of an experimental team that you'd run for fun. Auroron looks like an edgy emo, so maybe a therapist will be good for him. In return, he'll give you the benefits of 4-piece scroll. There's always the option to swap out Farina for more Electro too. Lisa, Yai or Fischl will work, and the Electro Resonance will help a unit like Lisa for generating more particles to cover her 80 burst cost. Nahida can hold Magic Guide, which is friendly towards free-to-play players, and her giving Mizuki a big elemental mastery buff is appreciated too. It's worth noting that Mizuki triggers Electro Swells. With enemies having Quicken auras, she'll get some big damage aggravate procs off herself, just like Kazuha does in aggravate teams. I tried Auroron initially, but found Lisa was better. She has a longer burst duration, defense shred, and being a catalyst means she has a bunch of support options. I wasn't a big fan of this team to be honest, but I thought I'd include it just to demonstrate what it can do. I know a few of you were cooking and were curious to see whether or not Mizuki would work in Quicken teams. I like Yaimiko's character, but I've just never been a fan of her playstyle. Before Kaniche came out, people used to run Emily in a burning vape team with Farina, Xiangling and Bennett. Swapping Xiangling out for Mawika and Bennett out for Mizuki gives us an alternative to it. Firstly, it's not anywhere near as energy hungry as the original team with Mawika instead of Xiangling. The downside to that though is that Mawika's relying solely on herself to build a burst with no other Natlan units in the team. Mizuki over Bennett means you can shred the opponent's resistance to both Hydro and Pyro, which is especially nice for Farina given the fact she doesn't benefit from Bennett's attack buff in the original team. The downside is that you'll find the off-fielders often have low HP with Farina's bleed, and healing the team with Mizuki is awkward. Let's try something different and look at Mizuki as an on-field normal attack DPS. I thought I'd try her as a DPS because she does have some pretty animations and I have a C6 Pharazan. I don't think she was great, but doing 2 normal attacks into a charge attack felt smooth. It consumed a lot of stamina, but having Pharazan for the Anemo Resonance lets us squeeze a few more out. Okay, definitely could have worded that a little bit better. I've gone with Farina, but if you don't have her or want something different, you can use Yelan as well. You could even use both and swap out Bennett. That way, Yelan and Farina get the extra HP from the Hydro Resonance. You could even swap out Pharazan for Xingqiu. Fuck it, bonus team. 10 teams even though the thumbnail says 9. Don't say Uncle Whoopi doesn't look after you. Seriously though, people use Kokomi, Kazuha, Yelan and Farina in a mono hydro team. This is a variant on that. Xingqiu's C2 reduces the opponent's resistance to hydro and is giving us an extra source of damage, a bit of resistance to interruption, and he can even reduce the team's energy requirements. That means more crit rolls in your artifacts. Big win. I thought I'd give Mizuki 4-piece VV but build crit rolls instead of elemental mastery and energy recharge. I found it difficult to get a burst back though, and she wasn't dealing damage anyway. If you do try this team, I suggest keeping a normal build with elemental mastery and energy recharge. Overloaded isn't amazing for Mizuki right now, but it does have potential depending on future releases. Usually you'd have to be careful because of a knockback and would typically only use it against heavier enemies. With Mizuki's grouping, she could still keep enemies in a range where they can be hit. Given the fact that Pyro has such strong off-fielders in Xiangling and Mawika as well as Bennett for support, I think is worth giving a go. In terms of an Electro teammate, you've got a Roron who would help Mawika gain fighting spirit for a burst as well as holding scroll to buffer damage. The only issue is his burst has a relatively small range which could be an issue with knockback. Yaimiko's an option for damage, but I'm hoping Iansan can give us another option when she comes out. Imagine having a new driver and not giving a national team a go. It's kind of fitting going back to national with his going back to Inazuma with Mizuki. I found this to be one of the strongest teams in the video, and while there are people that don't like Mizuki's playstyle, I enjoy it. I prefer other drivers in this team. Kenichi, for example, is strong in single target, but for a standard unit we can all get for free later in the year, Mizuki did alright. Her being able to hold VV is nice for Xiangling's damage too, considering she's going to lose a bit with Farina vaping instead of her. I personally preferred the team with Emily and Mawika, but they're limited 5 stars and Emily hasn't had a rerun yet. If you don't have them units, this team might be the one for you. For our last team, I thought to try some cryo units and the team actually surprised me with how good it is. I didn't expect it to be good because cryo characters typically don't deal much damage off field, but I think C6 Kaya did alright. I'm not sure he'll perform as well at lower constellations though, so just keep that in mind. I tried the same team with C Lally for Rosaria and it was comfier, but I found it a little more difficult to get Kaya's burst back, so the team was dealing a similar amount of DPS. You could maybe give C Lally Favonia's Codex to get around that issue, but if you don't have C Lally, you can just use Rosaria and you'll be good. Now imagine this team with Mizuki's C2 for extra hydro and cryo damage. I'd say this team's one strong cryo off-fielder away from being meta competitive, but it was one of my favourites to play. For a score out of 10, at C0, I'm going to give Mizuki a 6. I don't think she's anywhere near as bad as people are saying she is. I just think being restricted to more or less the same support units with one flex slot is boring. By the time we get to pick her from Anniversary, I imagine we'll have more supports for her. For a standard unit, I'll take that. It's nice that the constellations have some value too, with them actually being somewhat obtainable. I'm going to drop a video showcasing each of the constellations later. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in that one, and take it easy.